In 2010, the US government tried to shut down Google Translate. Not because it was bad, but because it was too good. They feared terrorists would use it to plan attacks, and for once, they weren't entirely wrong. The tool we now take for granted was once considered a national security threat, and the story of how it survived is wilder than you think.
Wait, what? The government wanted to ban Google Translate? That's insane. I mean, I use it all the time, like when I'm trying to read a menu in another language or figure out what a meme means. How could something so harmless be a threat? And why would terrorists even need it when they could just, I don't know, learn the language?
Because learning a language takes years, and terrorists don't always have that kind of time. Google Translate made instant communication possible across borders, and that terrified officials. But here's the kicker: the real battle wasn't about security, it was about control. Who gets to decide what words mean when they cross from one language to another? That's the question no one's asking, and it's changing the world in ways we don't even notice.
Okay, that's actually terrifying. So what happened next? How did Google Translate go from being a potential national security risk to the thing we all use without thinking? And who were the people behind it who had to fight to keep it alive?
Let's rewind to 2004, when two engineers at Google, Franzok and Sergey Brin, decided to build a tool that could translate entire languages in seconds. At the time, translation was slow, expensive, and mostly done by humans. The idea of a machine doing it was laughable. But Ak had a secret weapon, a technique called statistical machine translation, which used massive amounts of data to predict the best possible translations.
So they weren't just translating word by word, they were using patterns from real human translations to make it sound natural? That's actually kind of brilliant. But where did they even get all that data? I mean, you can't just scrape the internet for perfect translations, right? There's got to be a catch.
Exactly. The catch was that they needed millions of examples of human translated text to train their system. So they turned to the United Nations, which had decades of official documents translated into multiple languages. The UN's parallel texts became the backbone of Google Translate, and suddenly, a tool that was once a pipe dream was becoming a reality. But here's the thing: no one outside of Google knew how big this was going to be.
That's wild. So the UN basically unknowingly powered the entire future of machine translation? I mean, I get why they'd share their documents, their public records, but did they have any idea what Google was going to do with them? And how did the public even react when Google Translate first launched? Did people think it was cool, or just another weird tech experiment?
The public reaction was mixed. Some people were amazed: finally, a tool that could help them understand foreign news or communicate with relatives overseas. Others were skeptical, pointing out that the translations were clunky and often wrong. But here's the part no one talks about: Google Translate didn't just launch as a standalone tool. It was quietly embedded into Gmail, Google Search, and even YouTube, so people were using it without even realizing it.
Wait, so Google was sneaking translation into everything? That's actually kind of genius from a business perspective, but also kind of creepy. I mean, if I'm using Gmail and suddenly I can read an email in French, I'm not going to question it, I'm just going to think, oh, that's convenient. But what about the people who were actually paid to do translations? Did anyone see this coming?
No one saw it coming, and that's the tragedy. Professional translators, people who had spent years mastering languages and cultures, suddenly found themselves competing with a free tool that could spit out a translation in seconds. The American Translators Association called it a threat to the profession, but by then, it was too late. Google Translate was already everywhere, and the genie wasn't going back in the bottle.
That's heartbreaking. I mean, I get that technology moves fast, but these are people's livelihoods we're talking about. Did anyone try to fight back? Like, were there lawsuits or protests or anything? And how did Google even respond to the backlash? Did they just ignore it?
There were lawsuits, but they went nowhere. The real fight happened behind closed doors, and it wasn't just about jobs, it was about power. In 2009, the US government started paying attention. They realized that Google Translate wasn't just a tool for travelers or students, it was being used by people in countries with heavy internet censorship, like China and Iran, to bypass government filters and access information they weren't supposed to see.
Oh my god, so Google Translate was basically a backdoor for free speech? That's incredible. I mean, I know we think of it as just a convenience, but in places where the government controls what people can read, a tool like that could literally change lives. But wait, if the US government was worried about terrorists using it, why didn't they just ban it outright? What stopped them?
Two things stopped them: money and public backlash. By 2010, Google Translate was already being used by millions of people every day, and shutting it down would have been a PR nightmare. Plus, Google had deep pockets and powerful lobbyists. But the government didn't just roll over, they made Google agree to certain restrictions, like limiting translations for certain languages in certain countries. It was a compromise, but it set a dangerous precedent.
So the government basically forced Google to censor its own tool? That's so messed up. I mean, I get that they were trying to prevent bad actors from using it, but where do you draw the line? At what point does national security become just another excuse for control? And what about the people in those countries who were using it to access information? Did they just get left behind?
They didn't get left behind entirely, but their access was limited. For example, in Iran, Google Translate became a lifeline for people trying to read Western news or communicate with the outside world. But the government there quickly caught on and started blocking it. So users had to get creative, they'd use VPNs, or they'd translate text in chunks to avoid detection. It became this cat and mouse game, and Google was caught in the middle.
That's actually kind of inspiring, in a way. I mean, here you have people in a country with heavy censorship using a tool that was never meant for them just to get a taste of freedom. But what about the translators? The ones who lost their jobs, did any of them find a way to adapt, or was it just game over for them?
Some adapted, but many didn't. The ones who survived were the ones who realized that machines could never fully replace human nuance. For example, a translator named Emily Wilson started specializing in literary translations, books, poetry, things that required deep cultural understanding. She argued that while Google Translate could handle basic sentences, it would never capture the soul of a language. And she was right, but it didn't stop the industry from changing forever.
That's actually a really beautiful way to look at it. I mean, I love technology, but there's something magical about language that feels inherently human. Like, no machine is ever going to understand the weight of a word like saudade in Portuguese or hygge in Danish. But at the same time, I can't deny that Google Translate has done a lot of good. So where's the line? When does convenience become a threat?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer isn't simple. Let's talk about the turning point, the moment when everything changed. In 2016, Google rolled out a new version of Translate powered by neural networks, a type of AI that could learn and improve over time. It wasn't just faster, it was smarter. For the first time, machine translations started to sound almost human. And that's when the real problems began.
Wait, so they went from statistical translation to AI? That's a huge leap. I remember when Google Translate used to spit out these weird, robotic sentences that barely made sense. Like, I once tried to translate a Spanish phrase, and it came out as "the cat eats the happiness of the moon." Which, okay, is poetic, but not exactly helpful. So how did they fix that?
They didn't just fix it, they reinvented it. The old system worked by breaking sentences into chunks and translating each part individually, which is why you'd get those bizarre, nonsensical results. But the new neural system looked at the entire sentence at once, considering context, tone, and even cultural nuances. It was like going from a flip phone to a smartphone overnight. And the results were staggering. Suddenly, translations weren't just accurate, they were natural.
That's amazing. I mean, I've noticed that Google Translate has gotten way better over the years, but I never realized it was because of a complete overhaul. So what was the catch? There's always a catch with these things. Did it cost more? Was it slower? Or was there some other downside that no one's talking about?
The catch was that it required an insane amount of data and computing power. Google had to train the system on billions of sentences, and even then, it wasn't perfect. For example, it struggled with idioms, sarcasm, and cultural references. But the bigger issue was that it started to make mistakes that were harder to spot. Before, you could tell when a translation was bad because it sounded robotic. Now, the mistakes were subtle, like a word that was technically correct but completely wrong in context.
Oh no, that's actually worse. I mean, if a translation is obviously bad, you can at least question it. But if it sounds natural but is subtly wrong, you might not even realize it. Like, imagine if a legal document or a medical instruction got mistranslated in a way that wasn't obvious. That could be dangerous. Did anyone actually get hurt because of this?
There were cases, but they were rare. The bigger issue was trust. People started assuming that machine translations were always correct, which led to some embarrassing situations. For example, in 2017, a hospital in the UK used Google Translate to communicate with a patient, and the translation was so off that the patient ended up taking the wrong medication. The hospital had to issue a public apology, and it became a cautionary tale about relying too much on AI.
That's terrifying. I mean, I get that hospitals are busy and sometimes need quick solutions, but language is literally a matter of life and death in those situations. So what did Google do about it? Did they add warnings or disclaimers? Or did they just keep pushing forward and hope no one noticed?
They added disclaimers, but they also doubled down on the technology. They argued that the benefits outweighed the risks, and to be fair, they were right in a lot of cases. For example, Google Translate has been used to help refugees communicate with aid workers, to translate medical research into multiple languages, and even to preserve endangered languages by digitizing them. But the risks were real, and they weren't going away.
Okay, but let's talk about the mechanism here. How does this actually work under the hood? Like, when I type a sentence into Google Translate, what's happening behind the scenes? Is it just matching words to a dictionary, or is there something more complex going on? And how does it handle languages that don't even use the same alphabet, like Arabic or Chinese?
It's way more complex than matching words to a dictionary. The neural network is essentially a massive web of interconnected nodes that simulate the way the human brain works. When you input a sentence, the system breaks it down into smaller pieces, analyzes the relationships between the words, and then reconstructs it in the target language. For languages with different alphabets, it uses a process called transliteration to convert the characters before translating them.
That's fascinating. So it's not just translating, it's almost like it's rewriting the sentence from scratch in a new language. But how does it handle things like grammar rules that don't exist in other languages? Like, in English, we have articles like the and a, but in Russian, they don't. Does the system just ignore those, or does it try to add them in?
It doesn't just ignore them, it learns the rules of each language and applies them contextually. For example, if you're translating from Russian to English, the system knows that English requires articles, so it adds them in based on the context of the sentence. But here's where it gets tricky: the system doesn't actually understand the language in the way humans do. It's just predicting the most likely translation based on patterns it's seen before.
That's the part that freaks me out a little. I mean, if it's just predicting based on patterns, how do we know it's not just reinforcing stereotypes or biases? Like, if the data it's trained on has a lot of gendered language or cultural assumptions, won't the translations just reflect that? Has anyone actually studied this?
They have, and the results are concerning. In 2019, researchers found that Google Translate had a tendency to default to male pronouns for certain professions, like doctor or engineer, and female pronouns for others, like nurse or secretary. It wasn't because the system was sexist, it was because the training data reflected societal biases. Google has since tried to fix this, but it's an ongoing problem, and it's not just about gender. It's about race, culture, and even politics.
That's so frustrating. I mean, I get that the system is only as good as the data it's trained on, but at what point do we hold these companies accountable for the biases they're perpetuating? Like, if Google Translate is reinforcing stereotypes, Isn't that just making the world a little bit worse? And what about the ripple effects? How is this changing the way we communicate with each other?
The ripple effects are huge, and they're not all bad. On one hand, Google Translate has broken down barriers between cultures. It's allowed people to access information they never could before, and it's made the world feel smaller and more connected. But on the other hand, it's also homogenized language in a way that's never happened before. For example, English has become the dominant language of the internet, and tools like Google Translate are accelerating that trend.
Wait, so you're saying that Google Translate is making English the default language of the world? That's kind of depressing. I mean, I love English, I'm speaking it right now, but I also love the idea of linguistic diversity. If everyone is just translating everything into English, what happens to all the other languages? Are we just going to lose them?
Not necessarily. In fact, Google Translate has been used to preserve languages that are at risk of dying out. For example, there's a project called the Endangered Languages Project, which uses machine translation to document and revitalize languages that only a handful of people still speak. But here's the catch: the more people rely on Google Translate, the less incentive there is to learn other languages. And that's a problem, because language isn't just about communication, it's about identity.
That's a really good point. I mean, I took Spanish in high school, and even though I'm not fluent, I remember how much it changed the way I saw the world. Like, learning another language isn't just about being able to order food, it's about understanding how other people think. If we lose that, we lose a part of what makes us human. But at the same time, I can't deny that Google Translate has made my life easier. So how do we balance that?
That's the question we all have to grapple with. But here's the hidden angle, the part no one talks about. Google Translate isn't just a tool, it's a business. And like any business, it's designed to make money. The more people use it, the more data Google collects, and the more powerful it becomes. But what happens when that power is concentrated in the hands of a single company? What happens when Google decides to change the way translations work, or worse, starts charging for them?
Oh my god, I never even thought about that. I mean, Google Translate is free now, but what if it's not always free? What if one day we wake up and suddenly we have to pay to translate a sentence? And what about the data? If Google is collecting all these translations, what are they doing with them? Are they using them to train other AI models? Are they selling them to advertisers? This is starting to feel like a dystopian sci-fi movie.
It's not sci fi, it's happening right now. Google has already started using translation data to improve its other products, like search and ads. And while they claim they're not selling the data, they're definitely using it to make money. But here's the thing: Google isn't the only player in this game. There are other companies, like DeepL and Microsoft, that are developing their own translation tools. And some of them are even better than Google's.
Wait, so there are alternatives? Why haven't I heard of them? And if they're better, why isn't everyone using them? Is it just because Google has the brand recognition, or is there something else going on? And what about open source projects? Are there any that are trying to make translation more accessible without all the corporate baggage?
There are, and they're fascinating. For example, there's a project called Apertium, which is an open source machine translation platform. It's not as polished as Google Translate, but it's completely free and transparent. And then there's Facebook, which has its own translation system that's actually more advanced than Google's in some ways. But the problem is that most people don't know these alternatives exist, and even if they did, they're not as convenient as Google.
That's the thing about convenience, it's addictive. Once you get used to something being easy, it's hard to go back. But I guess that's the lesson here, right? We can't just blindly trust these tools, no matter how useful they are. We have to ask questions, like, who's behind this? What are their motives? And what are the long-term consequences? So what's the takeaway? What should we be thinking about the next time we use Google Translate?
The first takeaway is that translation isn't neutral. Every time you translate something, you're making choices about what to include, what to leave out, and how to frame the meaning. And those choices have consequences. The second takeaway is that we need to be more critical of the tools we use. Just because something is free and convenient doesn't mean it's harmless. And the third takeaway is that language is power, and we should never take it for granted.
That's a really powerful way to put it. I mean, I've always thought of translation as just a practical tool, but it's so much more than that. It's about who gets to be heard, who gets to be understood, and who gets left out. And that's a responsibility we all share, whether we're translators or just people who use these tools every day. So what's next? Where do we go from here?
We start by paying attention. The next time you use Google Translate, ask yourself, who's behind this? What are they getting out of it? And what am I giving up in return? Because the truth is, we're all part of this system now, whether we like it or not. And if we don't start asking these questions, someone else will make the decisions for us. But here's the good news, we have the power to change it.
I love that. It's not about rejecting technology, it's about using it consciously. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to keep the convenience without losing the humanity. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's one thing you wish more people knew about translation? Like, if you could get everyone to understand just one thing, what would it be?
I wish more people understood that translation is an act of creation, not just conversion. When you translate something, you're not just swapping words, you're rebuilding meaning from the ground up. And that means every translation is a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and a whole lot of responsibility. It's not just about getting the words right, it's about getting the soul right. And that's something no machine can ever fully replicate.
That's beautiful. And it's a great note to end on. But before we go, I want to remind everyone listening, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. We've got more deep dives coming your way, and we want you to be part of the conversation. What's a translation that stuck with you? Let us know in the comments, we're reading them all.
And if you're feeling really inspired, go out and learn a new word in another language today. Not because you have to, but because language is magic, and it's worth preserving. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on Podcast Name. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop translating not just words, but ideas, cultures, and connections. This is Alex, signing off. You know, Sarah, there's one more thing I've been thinking about. In 2018, a group of researchers discovered that Google Translate had a hidden bias against certain dialects. For example, if you translated a sentence from African American vernacular English into Standard English, the system would often change the meaning in subtle but significant ways. It wasn't intentional, but it was a stark reminder that these tools aren't neutral.
That's actually really important. I mean, if Google Translate is subtly altering the meaning of dialects, what does that say about how it treats other marginalized languages? Like, if it's doing that to AAVE, which is still English, what's it doing to languages that are completely different? And how does that affect the people who speak those languages every day?
It affects them deeply, and not always in obvious ways. For example, there's a language called Inuktitut, spoken by the Inuit people in Canada. Google Translate doesn't support it, which means that speakers of Inuktitut are effectively cut off from the global conversation. And that's not just an inconvenience, it's a form of erasure. Language is tied to culture, and when a language disappears, a part of that culture disappears with it.
That's heartbreaking. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would be like to have my language ignored by the tools that everyone else takes for granted. But what can we do about it? Is there a way to pressure companies like Google to include more languages, or is it up to the communities themselves to preserve their languages? And how do you even start something like that?
It's a combination of both. Communities can document their languages and create their own translation tools, but they need resources and support to do that. And companies like Google have a responsibility to include more languages, especially those that are at risk of disappearing. But here's the thing, it's not just about adding more languages to Google Translate. It's about recognizing that language is a human right, and that everyone deserves to be heard in their own voice.
That's a really powerful way to put it. Language as a human right, it's something I've never thought about before, but it makes so much sense. I mean, if you can't communicate in your own language, how can you fully participate in society? How can you express your ideas, your culture, your identity? It's like being silenced without even realizing it. But how do we make that a reality? How do we get to a place where every language is valued and preserved?
It starts with awareness. The more people understand the importance of linguistic diversity, the more pressure there will be on companies and governments to take action. And it's not just about preserving languages, it's about celebrating them. Imagine a world where every language is represented online, where every dialect is respected, and where translation tools are designed to empower, not erase. That's the world we should be fighting for.
I love that vision. And it's not just about translation, it's about connection. Because at the end of the day, that's what language is for: connecting with other people, sharing ideas, and building understanding. And if we can use technology to make those connections stronger, instead of weaker, then we're doing something right. But I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here. There's so much more to talk about.
There is, and we will. But for now, let's leave our listeners with this: the next time you use a translation tool, think about the people behind the words. Think about the cultures, the histories, and the identities that are being carried across languages. Because translation isn't just about words, it's about people. And people deserve to be heard.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to this and you've got a story about translation, whether it's a funny mistranslation, a moment when language changed your life, or even a language you wish more people knew, share it with us. We want to hear from you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. We've got more deep dives coming, and we can't wait to explore them with you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Remember, the world is full of languages, and every one of them has a story to tell. It's up to us to listen. Until next time, keep translating not just words, but the world. This is Alex, and we'll see you soon.
And I'm Sarah. Don't forget to like, share, and comment, we're reading them all. See you next time.
You know, one of the most surprising things about Google Translate is how it's changed the way we think about language itself. Before, we saw languages as these fixed, unchanging things. But now, we're starting to realize that language is fluid, dynamic, and constantly evolving. And that's a good thing, because it means we can shape it to fit our needs, rather than the other way around.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I've always thought of language as something that's set in stone, like, you learn the rules, and that's it. But if language is constantly evolving, then it's more like a living organism. And if that's the case, then tools like Google Translate aren't just reflecting language, they're actively shaping it. That's a huge responsibility.
It is, and it's one that most people don't even realize they're a part of. Every time you use Google Translate, you're contributing to the data that trains the system. And that data influences how the system translates in the future. So, in a way, we're all co-creators of this tool, whether we like it or not. And that means we all have a stake in how it evolves.
That's actually kind of empowering. I mean, if we're all co-creators, then we all have a say in how this tool is used. We can demand better, more inclusive translations. We can push for more languages to be supported. We can even create our own alternatives if we don't like the way things are going. But it also means we have to be more mindful of how we use these tools, because our choices have consequences.
Exactly. And that's the lesson I hope people take away from this episode. Translation isn't just a passive tool, it's an active force in the world. And the more we understand that, the more we can use it to build bridges rather than walls. But enough from us, what do you think, listeners? How has translation changed your life? And what would you like to see from these tools in the future? Let us know in the comments.
And if you're new here, welcome. We're so glad you found us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll be diving into another topic that's changing the way we see the world. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep translating. This is Sarah, signing off.
And I'm Alex. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Wait, Alex, before we go, I just thought of something. What about the future of translation? I mean, we've talked a lot about Google Translate, but what's next? Are we going to have real-time translation in our earbuds? Will AI eventually replace human translators entirely? And what about the ethical implications of all this? It feels like we're on the brink of something huge.
We are, and it's both exciting and terrifying. Real-time translation is already here. Companies like Waverly Labs and Google have developed earbuds that can translate conversations on the fly. And AI is getting better every day. But the ethical implications are massive. For example, if an AI is translating a sensitive conversation, who's responsible if something goes wrong? The company? The user? The AI itself? These are questions we're going to have to answer, and soon.
That's a lot to think about. I mean, I love the idea of being able to talk to anyone, anywhere, in real time. But I also worry about what we're giving up in the process. Like, if we rely too much on these tools, are we losing the ability to connect with people on a deeper level? And what happens when the technology fails? Because it will fail, nothing is perfect.
It's a trade-off, and it's one we're going to have to navigate carefully. But here's the thing, technology is just a tool. It's up to us to decide how we use it. We can use it to build walls, or we can use it to build bridges. The choice is ours. And that's the message I want to leave our listeners with today. The future of translation isn't set in stone. It's up to us to shape it.
I love that. And it's a great way to end this episode. So, listeners, what do you think? Are you excited about the future of translation, or does it scare you a little? Let us know in the comments, we're reading them all. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. We've got more deep dives coming your way, and we can't wait to explore them with you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Remember, language is power, and translation is the key to unlocking it. Use it wisely. Until next time, keep translating not just words, but the world. This is Alex, signing off.
And I'm Sarah. Don't forget to share this episode with someone who loves language as much as you do. See you next time.
You know, Sarah, there's one more story I want to share before we wrap up. In 2012, a translator named Abdul Rahman Al Sayed used Google Translate to help Syrian refugees communicate with aid workers in Turkey. He didn't speak Turkish, and the refugees didn't speak Arabic, but Google Translate bridged the gap. It wasn't perfect, but it saved lives. And that's the power of translation. It's not just about words, it's about people.
That's incredible. I mean, I've heard stories about how technology can change lives, but that's next level. It's a reminder that these tools aren't just for convenience, they can be lifelines. And it's also a reminder that we can't take them for granted. We have to fight to keep them accessible, inclusive, and ethical. Because at the end of the day, that's what translation is really about: connection.
Absolutely. And that's the message I hope our listeners take away from this episode. Translation isn't just a tool, it's a force for good, if we use it right. But it's up to us to make sure it stays that way. So let's keep the conversation going. What's a moment when translation changed your life? Share it with us in the comments. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode.
And if you're feeling inspired, go out and learn a new word in another language today. It doesn't have to be a whole language, just one word. Because every word is a step toward understanding. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on Podcast Name.
Until then, keep translating not just words, but the world. This is Alex, signing off.
And I'm Sarah. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. We're reading them all. See you next time.
You know, one of the most fascinating things about translation is how it reveals the gaps between languages. For example, there's a word in Japanese, kamaribi, which describes the sunlight filtering through the leaves of trees. There's no direct equivalent in English, so translators have to get creative. And that's where the art of translation really shines, when it's not just about words, but about capturing a feeling, a moment, a whole world.
That's so true. I mean, I've always loved how some words just don't translate, because it forces you to think about the culture behind them. Like, the German word Schadenfreude, the pleasure you get from someone else's misfortune, it's such a specific concept, and it says so much about how that culture views humor and human nature. But how do translators handle those kinds of words? Do they just leave them untranslated, or do they try to find a workaround?
It depends. Sometimes, they'll leave the word untranslated and add a footnote to explain it. Other times, they'll find a phrase that captures the essence of the word, even if it's not a direct translation. For example, in Spanish, there's a word, sobremesa, which refers to the time spent chatting at the table after a meal. In English, we don't have a word for that, but a translator might describe it as the art of lingering over coffee. It's not perfect, but it gets the point across.
That's actually really beautiful. I mean, it's like translation is this bridge between cultures, but it's also a reminder of how different we all are. And that's what makes it so special. But it also makes me wonder, if some words don't translate, does that mean some ideas are lost in translation? Like, are there concepts that just can't be expressed in other languages, no matter how hard you try?
Absolutely. And that's one of the limitations of translation. Some ideas are so deeply tied to a specific culture or language that they just don't translate cleanly. For example, in some indigenous languages, there are words for concepts that don't exist in Western thought, like the idea of land as a living entity. You can try to explain it in English, but it's not the same. And that's why it's so important to preserve these languages to keep those ideas alive.
That's a really important point. I mean, if we lose a language, we don't just lose the words, we lose the ideas, the stories, the worldviews that come with it. And that's a tragedy. But how do we prevent that from happening? Is it enough to document these languages, or do we need to actively revive them? And how do you even start something like that?
It's a huge challenge, but there are people doing incredible work to preserve and revive languages. For example, there's a project in Hawaii called the Alalo Hawaii Initiative, which is working to bring the Hawaiian language back from the brink of extinction. They're teaching it in schools, creating digital resources, and even using technology like Google Translate to make it more accessible. And it's working, more and more people are learning Hawaiian every year.
That's amazing. I mean, I love that technology is being used to preserve languages, not just replace them. But it also makes me think about the role of translation in all of this. If we're using tools like Google Translate to revive languages, are we also changing them in the process? Like, are we losing some of the authenticity or the cultural nuances that make them special?
That's a valid concern, and it's something that linguists and translators are grappling with. The truth is, every translation is an interpretation, and every interpretation is shaped by the translator's perspective. So when we use tools like Google Translate to revive languages, we're not just preserving them, we're also shaping them. And that's why it's so important to involve native speakers in the process, to make sure that the language stays true to its roots.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're going to revive a language, you have to do it with the people who actually speak it, not just with machines. But it also makes me wonder, what about languages that don't have any native speakers left? Like, languages that are already extinct. Is there any hope of bringing them back, or are they lost forever?
There's always hope. For example, there's a language called Cornish, which was spoken in Cornwall, England, and went extinct in the 18th century. But in the 20th century, linguists and activists worked to revive it, using old texts and recordings to reconstruct the language. And today, there are hundreds of people who speak Cornish fluently. It's not the same as the original language, but it's a start. And that's the power of translation. It's not just about preserving the past, it's about building the future.
That's so inspiring. I mean, I love the idea that language isn't just something we inherit, it's something we can create. And that's what makes translation so special. It's not just about words, it's about possibilities. But I feel like we could talk about this forever. There's just so much to unpack. So, listeners, what do you think? What's a word or concept that you've struggled to translate? Share it with us in the comments, we'd love to hear from you.
And if you're feeling really adventurous, try translating a poem or a song into another language. It's a great way to appreciate the beauty and complexity of language. And who knows? You might discover something new about yourself in the process. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. We'll see you next time on Podcast Name. Until then, keep translating not just words, but the world.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We've got more deep dives coming your way, and we can't wait to explore them with you. This is Sarah, signing off.
And I'm Alex. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
You know, Alex, I've been thinking a lot about what we've talked about today, and I keep coming back to one question: what's the future of human translators? I mean, if AI is getting better and better, will there still be a place for people in this field? Or are we heading toward a world where machines do all the translating, and humans just sit back and let it happen?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer is complicated. On one hand, AI is getting so good that it can handle a lot of the basic translation work that humans used to do. But on the other hand, there are still things that machines can't do, like capturing the emotional nuance of a poem or understanding the cultural context of a joke. So I think there will always be a place for human translators, but their role is going to change.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. I mean, if human translators aren't just translating words anymore, what are they doing? Are they more like editors, refining the work of machines? Or are they becoming something else entirely? And what about the creative side of translation? Like, if you're translating a novel or a film, how much of that is art, and how much is just technical skill?
It's mostly art. For example, take the work of Gregory Rabassa, who translated Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude into English. Rabassa didn't just translate the words, he translated the magic, the rhythm, the soul of the book. And that's something no machine can do. But here's the thing: as AI gets better, human translators are going to have to focus more on the creative, interpretive side of their work. They're going to have to become storytellers in their own right.
That's actually really exciting. I mean, if human translators are becoming storytellers, then translation isn't just a job, it's an art form. And that means we're going to see more diversity, more creativity, and more voices in the translations we read. But it also means that the bar is going to be higher. If machines can handle the basics, then human translators are going to have to bring something extra to the table. And that's a good thing, right?
It is, but it's also a challenge. Because not everyone is going to be able to make that transition. Some translators are going to struggle to adapt, and some are going to get left behind. And that's a tragedy, because translation is such an important field. But it's also an opportunity. If we can find a way to support human translators as they evolve, we can create a future where machines and humans work together to break down barriers and build understanding.
I love that vision. And it's not just about translation, it's about the future of work in general. As AI takes over more and more tasks, humans are going to have to focus on what we do best: creativity, empathy, connection. And that's something to be excited about. But it also means we have to be proactive. We can't just sit back and let the machines take over, we have to shape the future we want to see.
Exactly. And that's the message I want to leave our listeners with today. The future of translation isn't set in stone. It's up to us to shape it. So let's get out there and make it a future we can be proud of. But before we go, I want to ask our listeners, what's a translation that moved you? Was it a book, a poem, a song? Share it with us in the comments, we'd love to hear from you.
And if you're feeling inspired, go out and support a human translator today. Buy a translated book, watch a foreign film with subtitles, or even just take a moment to appreciate the work that goes into making these connections possible. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time on Podcast Name.
Until then, keep translating not just words, but the world. This is Alex, signing off.
And I'm Sarah. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're reading all your comments, and we can't wait to hear from you. See you next time.